A well-known Russian actress was shot in the back of the head in broad daylight and killed in her apartment on 11th December 1981. But what was the motive? And who killed her? Zoya Alexeyevna Fyodorova had been born in the Russian city of St. Petersburg on what is now 21st December 1907. In Russia at the time, this would have been 8th December. From a young age, she wanted to be an actress. She got her first break in 1932 when she starred in Shame, in a career that spanned 4 decades. She became a household name in Russia, and by the end of World War II, had starred in over 20 movies. During that time, she travelled to entertain the Russian troops, in a morale boost much needed by the Soviet army. Privately, Zoya was fighting to have her father, Alexei Fyodorov, released. He'd been arrested in 1941 for a derogatory comment against Joseph Stalin, the autocratic communist leader of the Soviet Union. But Zoya knew she had some sway, so approached Lavrentiy Beria, chief of the NKVD, the secret police, and his closest ally. Charming him, she managed to secure his freedom, but Beria wanted something in return. He flirted with her and made advances towards her, but she was having none of it. She'd been invited to Beria's wife's birthday party, but it wasn't to celebrate that, but to try and bed the actress. When she refused, he threw her out. Needless to say, Beria was furious, and he never forgot her rebuttal. In 1945, Zoya met 46-year-old American naval officer Jackson Tate at the US Embassy in Moscow. It appears it was love at first sight, but a risky move. Having an affair with a foreigner in Russia at the time could mean a term in prison, but to her it was worth the risk. He was a deputy naval attaché at the embassy. When the couple met, Zoya insisted Jackson didn't wear his naval uniform, and she also asked him not to speak as this would give away his American accent. Soon they began talking of having a child, celebrating VE Day by sleeping together, and Zoya hoped she would fall pregnant that night. In fact, she did. Beria, meanwhile, got wind of the affair, so sent Zoya to the Black Sea under the guise of entertaining troops once more. But in Moscow he expelled Tate from the Soviet Union, so Tate returned to the US, without seeing his lover before leaving. Throughout the pregnancy, Zoya was closely watched by the secret police. Even the birth was closely monitored by the state, Beria still using his influence for revenge. Zoya gave birth to a daughter, who she named Victoria. She and Jackson had spoken about names before she fell pregnant, and the 2 names that came up were Victor if a boy, or Victoria if they had a girl. Zoya wrote to Jackson to tell him of his daughter, but he never received many of her letters, with the exception of one, which was anonymous, and told him to leave Zoya alone. In 1946, when Victoria was just 1 year old, Zoya was arrested on trumped-up charges. She was told Jackson was a spy and accused of passing on sensitive information to him that, in turn, was given to the US government. But this was not all. She was also charged with organising a group to murder Stalin. She pleaded her innocence, but the state was having none of it. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Victoria was whisked away by her aunt, Zoya's sister, to Kazakhstan, but all of her property that she'd worked so hard for was confiscated by the authorities. On 5th March 1953, Stalin died at Kuntsevo, Dhaka, and this changed everything. Zoya was released from Stalin's gulags and rekindled her acting career, while her daughter returned to be with her. She was forever fearful that she would be arrested again, though, so she had to make provision should that happen. It was time to contact Tate. Irene Kirk was working as an interpreter in Moscow and was a professor at the University of Connecticut. She knew of Zoya's work and also knew Tate. Following her return to the US, Kirk managed to track Tate down and sent him a letter along with a photograph of his daughter. The problem was he still couldn't make contact with them, and both Zoya and her daughter thought he didn't want anything to do with them, as they never received the letters he'd sent, thanks to the KGB. During the 1950s, 1960s, and into the 1970s, unless you had a valid reason, it was near impossible to either leave the Soviet Union or to visit it. But that wasn't about to stop Zoya. She turned to the US press. On 25th January 1975, the New York Times published an article about the couple and what had happened to them. The story was then picked up by the Los Angeles Times, and the Inquirer's Henry Griss managed to contact Victoria, and in return for exclusivity, they would pay all her travel expenses, accommodation and so on. Excited by the prospect, Victoria accepted and arrived in the US, where she ended up marrying a Pan Am pilot, Fred Puoy, 3 months later, just before her visa ran out. She settled in the US and the couple went on to have a son, Christopher, while her mother was granted a visa to visit the family once a year. In 1976, Zoya finally made it to America, and Zoya, Victoria and Tate were finally reunited after all these years. But by this time, Tate was seriously ill. 2 years later, he died. Until her death in 1981, Zoya made the annual trip to see her family in the US. That year, she was refused a visa by the Soviet authorities, who cited her daughter's bad behaviour as the reason. This was due to the publication of Victoria's book, The Admiral's Daughter, in 1979, which told her story. On 11th December 1981, Zoya was shot and killed in her Moscow apartment, number 4, Kutuzovsky Prospect. When she was found 3 days later, she was sitting at a table, the telephone receiver in her hand, with her head thrown back, wearing an old dressing gown. The left side of her face was covered in blood. The bullet used to kill her had penetrated her left eye and shattered the lens in her glasses. It's worth noting that for a short time beforehand, Zoya had complained about receiving photographs of a gouged out eye. She was 72. Was this someone she knew, so she let them in? Or was it someone she'd arranged to meet to discuss something important? Or was it an organised hit by the authorities? A suitcase packed with clothes and jewellery sat in her apartment, and she'd let it slip she hoped to stay in the US on her final trip there. Rumours persisted that she was somehow involved in diamond smuggling and with the mafia in Moscow, and police surmised she'd perhaps sold some of the diamonds in the US during her visits there. It's known she bought them for powerful, well-known women, and it was surmised that this was why her case was passed on to the KGB. Another theory was that it was her close friend, Margarita Nabokova. This could explain why there was no forced entry, and why she was comfortable wearing an old dressing gown. She had visited the flat twice, and when she got no answer, left a note. But was this a red herring? Nabokova contacted Zoya's nephew, Yuri, who had a set of keys to the flat, and the scene that greeted him shocked him. Nabokova died a few months later. During the investigation, some 4,000 witnesses were interviewed and statements taken. At some stage, the police concluded they had a perpetrator in their sights, and this information was leaked to Victoria in the US. In September 1984, she wrote to the Moscow Criminal Investigation Department to thank them for getting justice, but the suspect has never been named publicly, and he has never stood trial. Whoever killed her, it seems she knew them. She was always extremely careful about her security and only ever spoke to strangers through the door. 2 days before her death, almost prophetically, she told her daughter during a phone conversation that she would be killed soon. To date, no motive has been discovered, and no one has been charged in connection with the murder of Zoya. Her daughter Victoria died in 2012, aged 66.